Welcome to Bloomberg Law. I'm Pacchia. Dewey LeBoeuf, which had more than 1,300 lawyers and 26 offices around the world, has been in a slow-motion meltdown. After more than a third of its partners left the firm in recent months, Dewey fired secretaries and associates en masse earlier this week. It appears to be close to going out of business. If it does, it would be the largest U.S. law firm ever to do so. To give us an insider's perspective on how the firm's troubles unfolded, we're joined today by Stuart Saft. He was the chair of Dewey's global real estate practice, and last week he joined Holland Knight as co-head of its New York real estate practice. He's the first former Dewey partner to appear on camera since the troubles began. I began our conversation by asking him what it's been like inside Dewey's offices. So, Stuart, in your final weeks at Dewey, partners were leaving almost at one a day. The firm canceled its summer associate program. Its health insurance company briefly suspended coverage. Some support staff were laid off. What was it like going into the office every day and not knowing what would happen next?
Well, this is going to sound very strange, but I really didn't see any of it. Mm-hmm. The real estate department was on a separate floor. None of the attorneys had left the real estate department. And so it was business as usual for us. We had a large volume of work that we continued to do. And we had heard stories about what was going on in other floors where people were leaving and where everybody was very concerned.
Right.
But we really didn't experience that.
What did you hear when you were talking to other partners and other groups, or when you went down to the cafeteria? I mean, it must have been a remarkable situation. What was it like?
Well, it really wasn't. In point of fact, most of the information that I learned from reading the newspapers.
You told the New York Times that you were speaking with something like 43 firms.
43 law firms reached out to me to move my practice.
It must have been difficult to service your clients and to field negotiations and calls with so many different firms. Walk us through the process. I mean, it must have been crazy.
Well, my first priority was servicing my clients, because regardless of where I was going to wind up, I wanted to make certain that my clients' work was being taken care of. And in point of fact, during this process, we were in the middle of negotiations for some very complex deals that never fell through the cracks. Mm-hmm. The other decision that I made very early was that I knew I would have opportunities to move my practice. I was not prepared and was never prepared to go just by myself or just with one or two people.
Let's get a sense for the numbers. How many partners, associates, paralegals, and support staff were with you at Dewey, and how many are going to make the jump to your new firm, Holland Knight?
Okay. Everyone has now joined me at Holland Knight. In my group, it's 6 associates, 3 paralegals, and 2 secretaries. Mm-hmm. And that's basically the group that has been working on all of my matters. 2 other partners, a counsel, and 2 associates had an invite to join me at Holland, and they opted to go to a different firm. But at least I knew they were protected. And then there are 2 other associates who I'm in the process of placing now with another firm, because they didn't really fall into either group.
Let's go back to the beginning of the recent turmoil. According to press reports in October, partners at Dewey were told by Chairman Steve Davis that more than 100 of the firm's equity partners, more than 100 out of the 190 equity partners at the firm were receiving guaranteed compensation. That is to say, they received predetermined amounts regardless of how the firm performed. Was that the first time the partners as a whole were told about this arrangement?
I think that, not that I think, but in point of fact, we knew that there were guarantees, but I don't think anyone imagined that it was 100 partners who had these guarantees.
What was your reaction when you heard the number?
Let me just finish saying, I think that we thought in terms of maybe 20 or 25 partners may have had the number. I was very surprised. In fact, I was shocked that it was such a high number. And I'm still surprised and shocked that it was such a high number. Of course, I think that a lot of people are, particularly a lot of partners, are extraordinarily angry right now at the turn of events. And I think there'll be a cooling off period while people actually look to see what the facts are. I don't think anyone really knows what all of the facts are. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't, and I was not only a partner but a chairman of a department. And I can only speculate, and I'm just not prepared to do that.
But that not knowing must have been at some level problematic as running an important department at a large firm. What was that like? I mean, does that impact ultimately your ability to run that department, not knowing what's happening in other parts of the umbrella organization?
Well, I think that the reality is that when law firms ceased being partnerships containing 5 or 8 or 10 lawyers and grew to be 100 and then 300 and then 1,000, they became businesses, and you reached a point where it was impossible for every partner to know everything that was going on. And in fact, it was one of the issues early on after the merger. There was a concern about confidential information leaking out, that Headhunters had access to what some of the partners' books of business were, and they were focused on those partners to try to move them to other firms. And the end result was that the information on the partners that was available to the partners was limited because some of it had been misused. Now, in retrospect, that of course had an adverse impact on the transparency of the operation of the firm. But I think in any large organization, you have this problem of how much information should be shared versus the ability of people to misuse the information. There are many of us who believe that well, in fact, this story started with blogs, and there are many of us who believe that it was the recruiters who got the story from the blogs and took it over to the mainstream press, because for a year prior to the first stories coming out, I was besieged by calls from recruiters, as were my associates. I mean, every day there were multiple calls coming in. And we sort of think that the way this played itself out was that this was going to be a bonanza for the recruiters if they could destabilize the situation and get partners to move their practices. And they took the story from the original blogs to the Times and the Journal, and then from there it became a media sensation. At the beginning of 2012, we were, for the first time, getting our house in order. We had a realistic budget to operate the firm. Caps were placed on all of the guarantees. There was a limit placed on expenditures. And at the beginning of 2012, we were dealing with all of these issues that had been around. And then the stories started to appear, and then the defections happened. But the reality is, and it's the reason why you really can't blame anybody for anything that happened, because the merger occurred at the end of 2007, and for the first half of 2008, we were just integrating. The two firms were just integrating, and then, of course, in the fall of 2008, Lehman collapsed. The economy went into the Great Recession, and our recently created organization had to find a way of surviving in this new world, using a paradigm that worked pre-Lehman but might not work post-Lehman. I was there during this period of time, and I disagreed with a lot of the decisions, but my belief is that you either lead, follow, or get out of the way. Since I wasn't willing to take a firm leadership role, my focus being on the real estate practice, I had to trust that my partners who were making these decisions were acting as prudent businessmen.
Stuart, which decisions in particular did you disagree with?
I think that's a difficult question for me to answer in this environment before all of the facts come out. My guess is that some of my former partners are angrier than others, and that we are not seeing the last of, in a sense, as Dewey and LeBoeuf turns, that there'll be plenty of acrimony and anger still to come, which is really unfortunate because, we've gotten this far in our lives. We have to move forward in our lives. Do we want to spend the next 5 to 10 years litigating with each other?
These things can go on for a long, long time.
They take on a life of their own, and the only ones then who benefit are the litigators. And the reality is, if all this litigation comes, and I had a reporter last week call and say that he heard that some of the partners were lawyering up. Mm-hmm. And the question is, for what purpose?
So starting this year, Dewey found itself in a cash crunch, and to save money, some partners weren't paid everything that they were owed. Were partners given a choice to forego compensation, or was this something that management forced on them?
It's difficult to say management forced something when, in fact, we were all partners and we could have voted one way or another. Yeah. From my perspective, I was pleased that that there was a focus on the problems. There was a focus on coming up with a budget which, based upon 2011, we'd easily meet. You have to remember that we had in terms of gross revenue, we had a very good year in 2011 that exceeded 2010. So we put together a budget at the beginning of 2012 that presumed we would do no worse than we did in 2011. And a committee was set up of independent partners who sat down and went through every line of the budget, and then we were presented with a full accounting of the budget. We sat there for mind-numbing hours going through presentations of virtually every line in the 2012 budget. It was a very realistic budget. We could easily have made it, and if we had made the 2012 budget, all of the partners would have been adequately compensated.
How many partners weren't paid everything that they were owed?
I have no idea.
Were you one of those partners?
Absolutely. We wanted to get past the past, and so the idea was we would take everything that was owed and put it into a long-term incentive plan, which was really a great idea. And then a certain percentage of the revenue in years going forward would go into the long-term incentive plan, and each of the partners who had deferred compensation would be paid out over a number of years. It was the equivalent of an annuity, which was really a terrific way of dealing with the overhang.
What percentage of your pay did you forego?
I'm not prepared to answer that.
Wanted to move on to the debt. Compared to other firms of its size, Dewey had, at least from our view, a lot of debt. Let's walk through a couple of...
Or so we think.
Or so we think, right. I mean, we don't know exactly what the picture is, but we're going to try and flesh it out here. I'm just going to run through a couple of the categories, or all the categories. First, in 2010, the firm issued $145 million in bonds through a private placement to insurance companies. Repayment is supposed to begin next year. Is that true?
That is my understanding.
Second, it has a $100 million bank line of credit, of which the firm drew down $75 million. Is that accurate?
That's what I've read in the newspapers.
Okay. Third, it has those guaranteed payments to some of the equity partners. About how much do you think is owed?
I've heard speculation, but I don't really know.
What have you heard in terms of speculation?
I really don't want to give some sort of legitimacy to the speculation that I've heard.
Fourth, we have the lease obligations for those 26 offices around the world, and most prominently, the 10 floors of the firm's headquarters on 6th Avenue in New York City. About how much do those lease obligations total to?
Again, I don't know what would be considered confidential information, so I really can't comment.
Fifth, there are the accounts payable. That's the money owed to the firm's vendors. Reportedly, that sum is $39 million, which is quite high. Can you confirm that amount?
I have no idea what the amount would be, but why would you say that $39 million is quite high?
That's just the reports that we've seen.
Okay.
But it seems like a lot.
In the abstract, it may or may not be. You have a business that produced, and there are different reports of what the number is, but it's in excess of $800 million. The reports are that we produced revenue in excess of $800 million last year. In 2011. We had, let's say had roughly 3,000 employees. So $39 million of trade credit is what? Less than 5% of what last year's gross was? I don't know if that's a high number or not.
Finally, the firm has the unfunded pension liabilities for current and former partners. An outside consultant has estimated that debt to be as high as $100 million. Does that ballpark number sound accurate?
I have no idea.
Okay. Should we be surprised that you, as the head of a group at the firm, wouldn't have a full understanding of what the debt picture might have been for the umbrella organization? I mean, it seems difficult to operate in that environment.
Well, I think we can assume, or I think my position would be that I have certain understandings of what the numbers may be, which I don't want to publicize. And before there's a full audit, I don't even know the information that I have is accurate.
Let's move on to the criminal investigations. In late May, reports surfaced that some of your former partners asked the Manhattan DA to investigate Dewey Chairman Steve Davis concerning partner capital loan payments. Davis was removed from all management functions, and the investigation is still ongoing.
I'm not certain that the former partners who raised the issue of the district attorney with the district attorney were motivated by anything other than stopping a merger discussion that was actively taking place at the time. I cannot, knowing Steve Davis as I do, and I think I know him fairly well.
You worked for him at LeBoeuf before the merger.
He brought me to LeBoeuf. We had a excellent relationship with each other, and I cannot believe that he did anything that is criminal. And unless making bad business decisions is a criminal act, which I don't think it is. I think that this is, I think that the criminal investigation, which is in essence what effectively has destroyed the firm, was just done out of anger and rancor and an attempt to stop a merger that would have provided a safe landing for a lot of partners and a lot of firm staff, and it's really unfortunate.
You've talked to a lot of law firms in the past couple months, just 43, just trying to figure out where you're going to go next. Presumptively, some were stronger than others. Do you think we're going to see more large law firms like Dewey, or maybe some in the middle tier, that will dissolve over the next 12 months?
Yes. Yes. I don't think that this is the end of it. I think the law firm paradigm that was built up between the late 80s and the Lehman crash doesn't necessarily work.
Where should we be looking next? Is this a problem for the top tier big law firms? Is there a problem in the middle tier? Are the specialized firms in certain practice areas in trouble? Where's the next Dewey?
Look, 6 months ago, you didn't expect Dewey was going to be the next Dewey.
I know it's a hard question to ask.
That's exactly right. And it doesn't take, and I've now watched this through, it does not take a great deal to destabilize a firm. One of my partners once said to me that a law firm is just people in a box. And you could go to probably any law firm in America, perhaps even the world, and one or two key players could decide to leave, whether it's for more money or access to better deals. That destabilizes the firm, and it's over.
Stuart, I want to thank you so much for coming in today and answering our questions.
Lee, it was my pleasure.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
That's Stuart Saft, partner at law firm Holland Knight. If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, be sure to check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com. You can follow our updates on Twitter and see more of our videos on YouTube. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.